Welcome back to the Foundation in C# course. We are currently in Module 7, and this lesson we're going to be discussing a mini project, specifically a API mini project. So let's look at the homework. The homework is to build a web API, or just an API core project. I call it web APIs out of habit, but an API core application with 2 post commands. Create a post that takes in a person's information and another that takes in address information. You don't have to link those two together in any way. That's what a database would do. But for this, just do 2 post commands, one for a person's information. Remember, that's first name, last name, and is active, that Boolean. And the other is the address post, which is street address, city, state, and zip. And just make sure that you think through how do you do those URLs. How do you make sure those URLs make sense with those controllers? Do you have 1 controller, 2 controllers? How does that work? Okay? Give that a shot. Pause the video right now. Go do that and come on back when you're done. All right, I assume you are back and you didn't have any problems. But even if you didn't have any problems, let's go ahead and create this so you can see how I would do it. ASP.NET Core Web Application. We want to call this the API Mini Project, an API Mini Project app. Hit Create. This is going to be an API type for .NET Core, .NET Core 3.0. No authentication. Just a quick note here that we could add authentication here, just like we do with MVC or Razor Pages. So we have our authentication on our API. We're going to configure it for HTTPS. We're not going to enable Docker support, and we'll hit Create. We'll close out of the mini project landing page, which is just welcome to ASP.NET Core, and instead we'll go right to our controllers. The first thing I'm going to do is, well, let's do this. I'm going to delete weather forecast. I don't want that in my API. Models. Right click on it and add a person model. And in this person model, we're going to have our first name, our last name, and our is active. And now in our person controller, we can look through these things and say, really, we don't need a delete or a put. We're not going to do those. We just need a get. We don't need a get with an ID. And in fact, we're not even going to use a get. So let's just have a post. Normally you'd have a get because it's kind of a standard thing that you have the ability to read, kind of like having an index page on your API controller, your MVC controller, but we're just going to have a post here, and we're going to pass in the person model, control dot to add our using statement there, and I'm not a big fan of data, or value, let's call it data. And let's add that logger just so we can log that to the console. So let's have our constructor, CTOR, tab, and ask for an iLogger. Control dot to add that using statement. an iLogger of type person controller, call it logger, and then down below say underscore logger equals logger, and then come back over here and do a control dot to add the, whoops, I had in the wrong field, control dot. Wake up. Quick actions refactoring. It's not doing it. Excellent. It's failed me. No problem. We can just say iLogger equal, iLogger underscore logger, semicolon. Control dot would have done it for me. For some reason, it quirked out on me. Normally, it would add that field and it would actually mark it as private as well, which is just explicit because implicitly it's private. But that way it's explicitly notified everybody that it's private. And now in here, we could just say logger.log information and say the person was logged as person. And yes, I can pass in just data there. And that would log that object. But the biggest thing in here is we're going to put a breakpoint and just look at the person. And let's run this as using the command line so we can see those commands coming through. Oops. There's the commands, and it tried to go to /weather forecast, which isn't right. But don't worry, we can't actually go anywhere here because we have no get commands. But that's not a problem because we have our postman. And so in postman, we need to make a call, and that's going to be a post call, and that's going to be to HTTPS localhost, and the port is 5001. That's the URL, and then we have in the body, we want to do a raw JSON, and we're going to do our curly brace. Let me zoom in here so you can see it better. So our curly brace, and then from there we're going to have first name. We're going to pass in first name, last name, pass in last name, and then our is active, we're going to pass in true. Okay? So we make that call, and it should pause us at our breakpoint, which it did not. That's interesting. And it gave us back a 404 not found. Of course it did. I didn't put a path on here. So this is, it looked weird, I knew that. API/person. I just figured guess where I was going to go. Let's try this again. Hit send, and now our breakpoint gets hit. And if we look at data, we see Tim, last name is last name. That's interesting. I typed last name. Excellent. And is active is true. I'm trying to talk and type at the same time, and that didn't work. So there we can see the information should have hit this box, and it did in here somewhere. It's in here somewhere. But if we come back over here, let's do it right and say last name is not last name, but Corey. And we hit send. Now last name is Corey. Cool. So we've now made a endpoint to post the person information to. Now we can do the same thing for our address information. So let's create a model first. Let's call it the address model. And yes, I could have used the DLL we created back in the WinForm project if I wanted to. Street address, the city, the state, the zip code. And I could put data annotations on here as well. It won't give you any kind of cool user interface experience because there is no like front end niceties, but it will reject the model if you set it up the same way as we did in the MVC project. Now the address model, let's right-click on controllers and say add controller. We're going to do an empty API controller. You already have the structure here. Call it address. And we're just going to copy and paste what we have. This is how I do things. I don't try to remember everything about how it's laid out. I remember the basics and where to find the rest. In this case, we just need to do this renaming and call this address model, control dot to add the using statement, control dot to add this using statement, and change this to be address. And I think that's it. And we'll say down here, address, but it's still data. Put our breakpoint down here. So we have another post call, but it's taking in address model instead. If we run this, once it's up and running, I can make the same call over here, but change this to be address. And of course, this isn't right anymore. And so I'm going to change this to be, street address. Let's zoom in for you so you can see it. Street address. And that's going to be 123 State Street. City is going to be Scranton. State is going to be PA. And the zip code is going to be, don't forget the string, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 works for me. And now I say send, as it's still a post. It's API/address. It's a raw JSON format post. If I hit send, now it goes here, and our data says 123 State Street, Scranton, PA, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that was it for the post on the address information. Pretty simple stuff, really. And no, I don't mean that Web API or API is simple, but once you get the structure in place, like I said, I don't necessarily remember, put the HTTP post up top and the from body and that kind of stuff. I don't necessarily remember all that, but as long as I have a structure in place, the rest of this stuff is just receive information and then store it in a database or do something else with it. Or for a get command, it's look up information and send it back. And they really act like just a C# class library, this API does. That's really all it is a class library with a couple of decorators and other fanciful stuff on top of it. But it's just a class library. It's just that it's not a class library that only a C# application can use. Anything can use it that can use an API. And so it really broadens your access to your application. So that's it for the homework. Even with those quirks at the beginning, I think we set a land speed record for fastest homework completed. Let's look at today's pro tip. And the pro tip is if you're going to learn one web application type, this is the one to learn first and best. So even though I put it last in the list because I kind of wanted to end on a this is awesome note, if you're going to learn one of these web application types in any depth, I would learn Web API. Because even if you're doing desktop applications, you can benefit from having an API. So that's my tip to you. You can take it for what it's worth and consider it as you are learning different applications. Okay, thanks for watching. Once you're done kind of playing around with this, trying things out, then move on to the conclusion of this course.